My name is Emily, and I live in Knoxville, Tennessee with my dog, Bandit. Bandit is my world. He's a Siberian Klekai with a mostly charcoal coat, streaked with white along his legs and face. He also has dark circles of fur around his icy blue eyes, giving him a mask-like appearance. I adopted him from a shelter when he was a tiny pup, right after my fiancé took a job in Tokyo. Bandit was my comfort during those long, lonely nights when I couldn't bear climbing into an empty bed for the 100th time. And in the years that followed, when my fiancé decided he was happier starting a new life with a woman he met abroad, Bandit helped me survive the heartbreak. Bandit is a powerhouse. He's got energy for days. While some dogs are happy with short walks, Bandit needs real adventure, which is why, for the past several years, I've taken him to Cherokee National Forest every weekend. It's one of the few places he can truly be free. Dogs weren't meant to be stuck inside all day. They need to run, to explore. So did I. The forest was my escape from the endless stress of my demanding, high-paying job. The woods were my sanctuary. But everything changed one crisp autumn afternoon when I learned the hard way that humans built towns and cities for a reason, because the wilderness isn't always our ally. Bandit had never been happier than when he was out in the woods. He's got this way of looking majestic and completely ridiculous at the same time, zooming around with his tongue lolling out, making me laugh. That's why it was so obvious when something was wrong. One minute he was his usual goofy self. The next he was a trembling mess, sticking close to my side and letting out soft, uneasy whines. In all our trips to Cherokee, I had never seen him act like that. When I reached out to stroke him, I could feel him shivering beneath his thick fur. My first thought was a predator, maybe a mountain lion. But the last time we'd encountered something wild, Bandit had turned into a barking, snarling machine, ready to take it on. That was last fall. The summer before that, bear sightings had increased in the area, and homeowners were warned to be extra careful with their trash. Maybe Bandit had caught the scent of a mother bear with cubs. If so, he was right to be cautious. But he wasn't just cautious. He was terrified. I had no idea what to think, but one thing was clear: Bandit wanted out. And if Bandit wanted out, so did I. The problem? We'd been hiking for nearly 2 hours already. Getting back to the car wouldn't be quick or easy. With every step, the tension mounted. Bandit kept looking behind us, eyes wide with fear, before darting ahead, then circling back, whining. His pace quickened, and so did mine. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following us. Bandit knew it, and now so did I. At one point, he froze beside me, staring into the dense forest, nose twitching as he sniffed the air. I thought that was the worst of it. I was wrong. With a yelp so loud it made me jump, Bandit bolted ahead, barking in panicked bursts. That's when I heard it, the rustling of branches behind me, and, even worse, the sound of something breathing, something enormous. I ran. I chased after Bandit, crashing through the trees as branches clawed at my skin. I've been scared before, uncomfortable, anxious, but nothing compared to this. This was the raw, animal terror of being hunted. I could hear my own pulse pounding in my ears, my lungs burning as I pushed forward. I ran until my legs felt like lead, but I couldn't stop. Bandit's frantic barking told me we had to keep moving. If we stopped, whatever was behind us would catch up. Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't dare slow down. The forest was thick, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. That's why I didn't notice the fallen tree root until my foot caught on it. I hit the ground hard, knocking the breath from my lungs. Before I could recover, Bandit was there, barking wildly at whatever lurked in the shadows. He was fierce, unyielding, his teeth bared in defiance. Then the thing behind us made a sound, a deep, guttural roar that sent ice through my veins. Bandit went silent. He rushed to my side, clamping his teeth onto my jacket and tugging desperately. Adrenaline surged through me. I scrambled to my feet, running harder, faster. I didn't know how long I could keep going, but I had to try. I had to survive. We burst through a wall of thick brush, only to skid to a stop at the edge of a river. Bandit froze. It wasn't deep, but it was wide enough to be a problem. Bandit hated water. No matter how hard I tried, I'd never been able to get him to go near it. Pools, lakes, rivers, he avoided them all. And now, faced with an impossible choice, he paced frantically along the bank. I begged him to jump, pleaded, bribed him with promises of treats. His eyes locked onto mine, full of fear, asking me why I was making him do this. Then he turned and ran, straight back toward the thing chasing us. I nearly screamed, but then, just when I thought all hope was lost, he reappeared, hurtling toward the river at full speed. He leaped, soaring through the air. His eyes, those huge, round, blue eyes, were filled with disbelief, like he couldn't quite grasp what he was doing. He barely made it. His paws scrabbled at the muddy bank, and I lunged, grabbing his collar and hauling him up. We didn't stop running until we were sure we were safe. I don't remember collapsing, but I must have, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up in the back of a pickup truck. A stranger in hunting gear handed me a bottle of water. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I just gulped down the water, heart pounding. Then I realized Bandit. Where was he? The hunter saw my panic and reassured me. Bandit was fine. He was inside their cabin, safe and sound. He hadn't left my side for hours, waiting for me to wake up. The hunters listened as I told them everything, but when I asked what could have been chasing us, they hesitated. One of them suggested a grizzly, but that was a lie. Grizzlies don't live in Tennessee. They saved my life, and for that, I'm forever grateful. But they knew something they weren't telling me, and as long as they keep that secret, people will continue to vanish in those woods. Bandit is lying at my feet as I type this, ever loyal, ever watching. And in my darkest moments, I wonder how I'll ever manage without him, because I have a terrible feeling that whatever was out there that day isn't gone. This is a plea, a warning. Please, I beg you, do not go hiking in the forests near Lenox, Massachusetts. I know those woods like the back of my hand. When I was young, I spent endless days playing among those trees with my younger brother. So trust me when I say something in those woods has changed, and not for the better. I first realized something was terribly wrong during a hike earlier this spring. Around this time, birds usually return from the warmer regions to reclaim their northern nesting spots. By the thousands, tiny songbirds fill the branches around Saddleback Mountain, each one singing its tune, a call for challengers to prove their worth. But as I stepped through last year's fallen leaves, I heard nothing. No birds, no animals, nothing. This unsettled me for two reasons. First, animals can sense danger in ways humans cannot. Their heightened senses allow them to detect threats we'd never notice. If the wildlife had abandoned the area or refused to return, it meant something truly terrifying was near. Second, forests only grow eerily silent when a large predator is present. Birds will freeze in place, hoping a prowling bear or cougar might pass them by. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Either way, it was too dangerous for me to keep wandering if something deadly was stalking the area. So I did the logical thing, I turned back toward my car. That's when things got truly bizarre. I should remind you at this point that I've been exploring the forests around Saddleback Mountain since I was a child. Even though it was a good distance from where we lived, my brother and I rode our bikes for miles during summer breaks, giving us a vast area to explore. I know these woods inside and out, and yet somehow I got lost. I only realized I was disoriented when a dull ache began pulsing in my head. I stopped for a moment, rubbing my temples, trying to ease the pain. But when I opened my eyes and looked around, a wave of unease washed over me. I didn't recognize anything. I can't overstate how deeply disturbing it is to be in a place you've known your entire life, only for it to suddenly feel completely foreign. Panicking slightly, I pulled out my compass, hoping to get my bearings. But to my horror, the needle refused to settle. Even when it briefly held in one direction, it would slowly begin shifting again. This wasn't an immediate crisis. I knew ways to navigate without a compass. One simple trick: moss typically grows on the north-facing side of tree trunks, where sunlight is weakest. So I checked several trees, expecting an easy answer. except the moss was mostly growing on the southern side. Or, the sun was in the wrong part of the sky. My brain struggled to process this contradiction. It wasn't impossible, but it didn't make sense. The more I tried to rationalize it, the worse my creeping anxiety became. But panic is dangerous. Panic leads to bad decisions, and bad decisions lead to disaster. So I forced myself to stay calm. I told myself there was a reasonable explanation for all of this and began walking in the direction I believed the nearest road was. That's when I stumbled upon something I had never seen before. Something that did not belong in those woods. It was an old, decaying cabin. In all my years of wandering these forests, I had never come across it before. And yet, there it stood, clearly abandoned, yet eerily intact. Judging by the worn structure and rotten wood, it had to have been built sometime before the 1980s. How had my brother and I missed this place? The most logical course of action was to knock on the door and see if anyone was inside. As much as I hated the idea of admitting I was lost, asking for directions was my best bet. But as I approached the cabin, an overwhelming sensation crept over me. Each step forward became harder, as if something unseen was pushing against me, willing me to turn away. By the time my knuckles rapped against the door, my entire being screamed at me to leave. A voice, not an actual sound, but a deep, instinctual thought, echoed through my mind. Turn back. Leave this place. Do not look back. The door creaked open slightly, revealing the darkness within. Any locks or bolts had long since rusted away, and the inside was as decrepit as the exterior. Yet, despite the decay, the furniture was oddly arranged, almost as if someone, or something, occasionally used the place. And then I saw it. There, in the farthest corner of the room, stood a wooden idol atop a stone altar. At least, I think it was an idol. Even now, I struggle to describe it. My eyes saw it, but my brain refused to process it. The sight of it sent a fresh wave of agony through my skull, the headache from earlier returning with brutal force. I don't know how to explain it, but that idol, this twisted mess of wood, vines, and moss, radiated something truly evil. It was pure, raw malice given form, and I ran from it. I am not ashamed to admit that I bolted from that cabin like a terrified child, crashing through the undergrowth, desperate to escape. And then, I noticed something even worse. Night had fallen. When I had stepped into that cabin, it was still daylight. I had only been inside for what felt like minutes. And yet, when I stumbled back out, the forest was cloaked in darkness. I didn't stop running until I reached the road. I didn't stop until I reached my car. And I didn't stop driving until I was safely home. Until now, I haven't been able to talk about what happened to me that day. I once tried telling a friend who hunts in those woods, but the words wouldn't come. But please, take this warning seriously. Stay out of the forests near Lenox, Massachusetts. Each summer for the last several years, my friends and I have made the trip from our homes in Manchester, England, to a remote part of the Scottish countryside. This area is home to one of the largest stretches of woodland in the entire UK, Caledon Forest. It's about as wild as it gets in Britain, with some areas so thick with trees and undergrowth that it looks like no one has set foot there in centuries, maybe even longer. Our annual visits always gave us a sense of peace, clarity, and appreciation for nature. But last year's trip took a terrifying turn. One that shook me to my core and changed the way I see both the world and the human mind. Every year, we take an overnight bus across the border, then hike out to a place called Loch Braden, a private fishing lake maintained by a small angling club. They make sure the waters are teeming with fish, which makes it easy for us to sneak in, catch just enough for a meal, and get out. I'm talking about a quick 45-minute job, practically unheard of when it comes to fishing. But last year, we decided we wanted something different, something further off the beaten path. Looking at a map, we found another deep lake about 30 miles east called Loch Darroch. It seemed like an ideal fishing spot, and we were right. The catch wasn't as fast as at the private lake, but at least we didn't feel guilty about taking what wasn't ours. Everything was going perfectly until the second night. We were sitting around the fire, having a few drinks, when one of my mates suddenly jumped to his feet and backed away from the flames. "Who was that?" he asked, at first sounding more puzzled than scared. "Who's who?" Someone responded lazily. "There was someone moving in the trees, just behind you," he said, pointing straight past my shoulder. I let out a small, sarcastic laugh, assuming he was just trying to spook us. But when I saw the look on his face, my stomach dropped. He was serious. A jolt of fear ran through me, and I quickly stood up, spinning around and shining my torch into the darkness. Tension rippled through the group as we all scanned the woods, sweeping our flashlights across the trees, searching for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. "Hello?" someone called out, only to be immediately hushed by the rest of us. None of us wanted to give away our location, but at the same time, we needed to know if someone was out there watching us. Silence. "I think you've had a bit too much to drink, mate," I said, trying to play it down. "I'm fine," he insisted. "I barely even touched my bottle. I swear to God, I saw someone." "Like who?" someone asked. "Man? Woman? Young? Old?" "I don't know," he replied, his voice shaking. "But they were huge. Really, really big. The only big thing around here is your imagination, mate." Another one of us joked. "Get some sleep. It's been a long day." And it had been. Thanks to the overnight bus ride, none of us had gotten any real rest on the way up to Scotland. We might have shut our eyes and listened to some music, but no one actually slept. So by the end of that first night, we were all completely drained. The next morning, we felt even worse. Normally, the first night is when we sleep the hardest, recovering from the journey. But not this time. None of us could fully relax, not with the thought of someone lurking in the woods. Thankfully, we had only planned to fish that day, which was good because we were too exhausted for anything else. After breakfast, we grabbed our gear and hiked down to the lake. It was a beautiful spot, clear blue water surrounded by rolling hills. Scotland gets some surprisingly sunny days in the summer, but that morning, the sky was a miserable, washed-out gray, making it feel like the sun had barely risen at all. I was cold, tired, and soaked from the constant drizzle, barely even excited to be fishing for my dinner. Honestly, I wished for something interesting to happen. And unfortunately, I got my wish. "Look!" someone shouted. "Over there, other side of the lake. Do you see that?" It was the same guy who had seen something in the woods the night before. One sighting could have been his imagination, but two, that was harder to dismiss. "There," he said, pointing frantically. "Something just stepped out of the trees, and then it was gone." He turned to us, his eyes wide. "Please tell me you saw that." "Mate, calm down," someone tried to reassure him. "It's probably just. I know what I saw. We need to get the hell out of here, right now." With that, he started packing up his fishing gear in a panic, hurrying back toward camp. One of the lads followed him, trying to calm him down, but it was no use. He was beyond reason, terrified out of his mind by whatever he thought he had seen. The rest of us exchanged uneasy glances. None of us had seen anything, but that didn't mean we weren't freaked out by his reaction. We were supposed to stay for a full week, but that second night ended up being our last. After a lot of convincing, we managed to get our panicked friend to agree to stay a few more nights. We had come all this way, and I wasn't about to let one of us leave just because of a little scare. But then, in the middle of the night, it happened again. He burst out of his tent, waking the rest of us. "Can you hear that?" he asked, his voice shaking. Silence. I strained my ears, trying to pick up whatever noise had him so spooked. But there was nothing, just the quiet shuffling of sleeping bags as everyone sat up, confused. Then I saw him clutching at his ears, gritting his teeth, rocking back and forth in the dirt. Whatever he was hearing, it was unbearable. And that was when I realized it. At that exact moment, I think everyone else did too. There was no sound. There was no monster. It was all in his head. He was breaking down, and it was terrifying. Hey Reddit, my name is Sophia. I live in the Pacific Northwest, specifically in the lush and rainy state of Oregon. One of my resolutions for 2021 was to shed the extra pounds I had gained after my first pregnancy. Weight that had drained my confidence and made me feel sluggish. My husband always reassured me that he loved me no matter what, but I wanted to feel good about myself. I know it might sound a bit traditional, but I wanted to look my best for him, just as he put in effort to look his best for me. The problem was, I never liked the atmosphere at mixed-gender gyms. Some people seemed more interested in socializing or staring than actually working out. Women's gyms, on the other hand, often lacked the funding to be worthwhile. So I decided to take up hiking. I figured fresh air and nature would do wonders for my mental health, and I had already been going on walks in the woods to help with postpartum blues. It worked wonders. I still remember the excitement of driving to an outdoor gear store to pick up a sturdy pair of hiking boots, along with a bunch of waterproof gear, mostly in lavender, my favorite color. It felt like the beginning of something amazing. I had even joined a hiking forum online, asking for advice on lightweight equipment, eager to share my progress. But my first serious solo hike was anything but peaceful. It ended up teaching me a lesson about the raw power of nature in a way I never expected. My husband and I arranged for him to watch our baby while I drove out to Cascade National Forest for an afternoon trek. Everything was perfect for the first hour. I powered up the hills, feeling the satisfying burn in my legs, and relished the relief of each descent. It was invigorating, at least until I tripped. I'm not sure if it was a root, a rock, or something hidden beneath the dirt, but before I knew it, I was on the ground, clutching my ankle and wincing in pain. I could still put a little weight on it, so it wasn't broken, just badly sprained. Still, it hurt like hell, and that's when something totally unexpected happened. A raven, small, sleek, and jet black, fluttered down from a nearby tree and landed on a fallen log. It flapped its wings and started hopping around, calling loudly as if putting on a show. It had seen me fall and swooped down to check on me, or at least that's what it looked like. I gave a shaky laugh and said, "I'm okay, just scared myself." And like magic, the raven quieted down, tilting its head at me with its glossy black eyes. With my ankle still throbbing, I slowly got up, said goodbye to my new little bird companion, and started limping back toward my car. That's when something incredibly sweet happened. My new feathered friend actually followed me. He flew from branch to branch, never too far away, cawing now and then as if to check in. The fall had rattled my nerves, but knowing that this little creature was watching over me was oddly comforting. Unfortunately, my ankle started swelling fast, and the pain only got worse. Now, I know this might sound dramatic, but the sharp, unrelenting pain triggered something deep in me. It brought back memories of childbirth, the helplessness, the intensity of it. I sat down on a fallen tree, trying to breathe through it, but the emotions overwhelmed me, and I started crying. And just like something out of a fairy tale, my little raven buddy swooped down again, repeating his strange little dance. It was like something out of a storybook, the weeping woman and her concerned bird companion. But then, in what should have been a heartwarming moment, something shattered my sense of safety. I heard movement in the trees about 100 yards up the slope. Something big, something breathing heavily. When I turned my head, my blood went cold. A massive brown bear had emerged from the brush, its fur rough and its eyes locked on me. And worse, it was drooling, fresh out of hibernation and starving. At that moment, my little raven friend started cawing again. But this time, it was different. The calls were frantic, sharp, almost urgent. I thought it was warning me. Couldn't have been more wrong. The bear suddenly charged downhill, barreling through the undergrowth with terrifying speed. My heart nearly stopped, but I was prepared thanks to the advice from my online hiking group. I had bought the strongest bear spray available. I grabbed it, flipped the safety off, and unleashed a massive, blinding yellow mist right in front of me. For a split second, I was sure it wouldn't work, that the bear would push through the pain and rip me apart. But then, miraculously, it stopped. The bear staggered, blinking rapidly as the irritant burned its eyes and nose. It sneezed violently, shook its head, and let out a miserable, guttural roar. I didn't wait around to see what happened next. I ran, Ran until my injured ankle felt like it was going to explode. By some miracle, I found my way back to my car. I somehow managed to drive home. I lived to tell the tale. Later, when I recounted the story, I did some research on ravens. What I thought had been an innocent, fairy tale-like friendship between a kind-hearted bird and a lost hiker turned out to be something far darker. Apparently, ravens and bears have a special relationship. When a raven spots an injured or weakened animal, it doesn't cry out in concern. It calls loudly to attract a predator, often a bear, to come finish the job. Once the bear has eaten, the raven feasts on whatever remains. That day, I had come terrifyingly close to becoming the remains. One of the tallest volcanoes in Asia, this mountain is also among the most revered landmarks in Japan. It holds deep cultural significance, and on clear days, those going about their daily routines in Tokyo can glimpse its perfectly shaped, snow-capped peak in the distance. The mountain frequently appears in art and photography, becoming one of the most recognizable images on Japanese postcards, thousands of which are mailed worldwide each year. On the northwestern side of this iconic peak, covering roughly 230 square kilometers of solidified lava, lies a forest called Aokigahara, sometimes referred to as the Sea of Trees. The woodland is so thick in certain areas that it creates an eerie silence. The porous volcanic rock of the ground is known to absorb sound, making the atmosphere unsettlingly quiet. This has made it a notable location for various activities such as hiking and camping, but also for much darker purposes. Aokigahara has long held a grim reputation in Japan. According to local folklore, it is said to be inhabited by eerie, spirits of those who have passed on. This eerie association stems from the fact that the forest has become infamous as a site where individuals take their own lives. Each year, dozens of people enter the dense woodland with no intention of leaving. The frequency of such incidents has led Japanese authorities to post signs along the trails, urging visitors to reconsider and providing helpline numbers. In 2003 alone, more than 100 bodies were discovered in Aokigahara, a stark increase from 78 found the previous year. By 2010, Japanese police recorded over 200 attempts within the forest, with more than 50 of them being fatal. Despite warnings and intervention efforts, people continue to venture there. The most common methods used in these tragic cases include overdoses and hanging, though authorities and journalists who search the area have encountered other means as well. Curiously, the number of such incidents tends to rise in March, coinciding with the end of the financial year in Japan. This trend has led officials to suppress the publication of statistics, hoping to reduce Aokigahara's notoriety as a destination for such acts. Many believe the site's reputation was further fueled by a 1961 novel by Saicho Matsumoto, titled Nami no To, translated as Tower of Waves. The story follows a couple who, after realizing they can never be together, enter the deep forest near the mountain to take their own lives. It remains one of Japan's most poignant and tragic love stories. However, the blame for Aokigahara's reputation cannot rest solely on Matsumoto's novel. Another book, written by Wataru Tsurumi, also contributed to this dark history. Kanzen Jizatsu Manuaru, or The Complete Manual of Suicide, was first published on July 4, 1993, and sold over 1 million copies. In its introduction, Tsurumi claims that by acknowledging the option of ending one's life, people may find temporary relief from their struggles. He states that he never intended to encourage such actions, yet the book provides detailed instructions on various methods, rating each based on factors like pain level, likelihood of failure, and aftermath. Its release was met with intense controversy. However, Aokigahara's association with death predates both of these books. Historically, the forest was linked to an ancient practice known as ubasut, or abandoning an elderly person. In times of hardship, frail or elderly family members were taken to remote areas and left to perish. While other societies moved toward palliative care and elder respect, Japan continued this practice well into the 19th century. Many believe this history is why Aokigahara is thought to be haunted, filled with spirits of those left to die there. Despite efforts to reduce public fascination with Aokigahara, the forest made international headlines again due to an incident involving YouTuber Logan Paul. The American internet personality faced enormous backlash after uploading a video from his visit to Japan, in which he and his companions stumbled upon the body of a deceased person in the forest. Though visibly disturbed at first, Paul and his friends were criticized for making inappropriate jokes about the situation. The video quickly went viral, sparking outrage and condemnation. Though the deceased individual's identity was never revealed, Paul blurred the person's face before posting the footage. Still, the video, which amassed millions of views before being taken down, was widely condemned as disrespectful. Following the incident, YouTube removed Paul's channel from its Google Preferred program, which promotes top content creators for advertisers. The platform also suspended its collaborations with him. Every year, over 25,000 people in Japan take their own lives, an average of 70 per day, with men making up the majority. One particularly shocking case in 2014 involved a 71-year-old man who set himself on fire aboard a high-speed train. Witnesses recalled that he warned fellow passengers to move away before carrying out the act. His case once again forced Japan to confront its long-standing struggles with mental health and social pressure. Why do some people choose death over life? These are questions that may never have clear answers. As long as such tragedies continue, Aokigahara will remain a place marked by sorrow, with the colored ribbons left behind by those uncertain of their final decision, guiding lost souls back to the world they left behind. The most chilling story I ever heard came from my grandfather. He had been a soldier in the final years of the Second World War, enlisting on the day he turned 19, March 5, 1945. Because of the timing, he missed the infamous D-Day landings and the chaos that followed, but he arrived on the Western Front just in time to take part in something just as terrifying, if not worse, the invasion of German territory. Looking back, with the kind of clarity that only history provides, it's clear that Germany was doomed to lose, crushed between the Allied and Soviet forces. But at the time, during the brutal daily combat in the fields and forests of Central Europe, nothing felt certain. In fact, many Germans still believed they could turn the tide, whether through new experimental weaponry, relentless defensive strategies, or a mix of both. They were far from surrendering, and it was into this nightmarish stage of the war that my grandfather found himself thrust. The brutal push into the German homeland would prove to be as horrifying, if not more so, than everything that had come before. On October 4, 1945, the Battle of Aachen began. The city had been absorbed into the Siegfried Line, Germany's main defensive barrier along its western front. The Allies were determined to capture it quickly and push into the industrial Ruhr region to cripple German manufacturing for good. However, just south of the city lay a dense woodland known as the Eichenwald, or Oak Forest. More than 75,000 German troops were stationed there, and the U.S. forces were sent in to pin them down, preventing reinforcements from reaching Aachen. It was in those dark, sprawling woods that my grandfather's story takes place. His platoon had been ordered on a standard patrol, scouting for German defensive positions to call in artillery and air support. The morning had been eerily quiet. Then, suddenly, the silence was shattered. A single, distant rifle shot rang out, and one of his comrades collapsed into the dirt. The soldiers scrambled for whatever cover they could find, but it took them precious moments to pinpoint the sniper's position. By the time they did, 3 or 4 more Americans had already fallen. Some tried to retreat under the cover of suppressing fire from their squad mates, but the sniper cut them down before they could escape. In no time at all, the entire platoon was pinned, unable to move without being picked off. As bad as that was, what haunted them most was what came next. The squad's radio operator had been among the first killed, bleeding out quickly in a small clearing. Every time someone attempted to retrieve his radio, the sniper would fire, forcing them back. One brave soldier managed to reach it, but the sniper's bullet found his hand, tearing through tendons and rendering it useless. With horror, my grandfather and his men realized they had no way to call for help. More than 20 men were now completely at the mercy of a single German marksman. Again and again, soldiers would shift slightly, maybe peek up to locate the sniper, and each time, the result was the same. Another man struck down, another scream of agony, another lifeless body on the forest floor. But the worst part was the laughter. The sniper laughed every time he landed a shot, his voice ringing through the trees. My grandfather said he would never forget that sound, the sheer, twisted joy in the man's voice. Sometimes, he would shout something in German, which my grandfather later had translated, "No more crying children." For nearly 6 hours, the sniper held them there. To my grandfather, it felt like an eternity. They lay motionless as the unblinking eyes of their fallen comrades stared back at them, frozen in terror. When the sniper ran out of fresh targets, he began firing at the dead. He was playing a sick psychological game, trying to break them. My grandfather and his men could only watch in horror as a bullet tore into the skull of a man who had died leaning against a tree. Head wounds were always the worst, he said. When the human skull is shattered by a bullet, shrapnel, or blunt force, the face distorts in unnatural, grotesque ways. The first shot split the man's head nearly in two. My grandfather, who had known him for months, said he suddenly looked unrecognizable. His eyes were too far apart, his face no longer human. But the sniper wasn't done. He kept firing, laughing all the while. Another shot, then another, until the man's head was nothing but a gory mess of shattered bone and brain matter, his eyes dangling from what remained of their sockets. I can't begin to imagine what that must have been like for my grandfather, who was barely out of his teenage years. He was just a kid. Thinking back to when I was 19, I could barely handle a deep cut, let alone watching someone's head get obliterated. The platoon had to wait until nightfall to escape. They crept away in the darkness, hearts pounding, fully expecting to be shot at any moment. As they fled, the sniper's voice echoed through the trees, mocking them, calling them cowards, his laughter ringing out like a nightmare come to life. One soldier was so terrified he ran straight into a tree, breaking his nose. But he didn't stop. He just got up and kept running. My grandfather passed away last year. I like to think of this as my tribute to him, a great man who endured horrors beyond imagining. Rest easy, Grandpa.